Good afternoon and welcome to the Ask Weldon Show, episode 258. Today the title is Coaching Men versus Women, Important League of Legends Stats and Skill Ceilings. Just need to pull the title right there. So I'll jump into the first question. Afterwards we'll do announcements. Nothing really big today. Went to the gym this morning, did yoga, body weight stuff, and swam. So not really a lot of heavy lifting, but just maintenance, basically. So why don't we jump into it? Question number one, and this question is from, I'm going to put it actually back over here so that I can pull up the audio for the question. Question number one is from Christian.
Hello, Weldon. What are some of the most important statistics in gauging a player's effectiveness / ability that viewers may not be aware of?
All right. So I think that statistics gathering in League of Legends is really hard. And to be honest, I'm not sure that there are a lot of other stats that we don't already collect. I think that probably the most important one that cannot actually be collected at large is error rate. So you can't really see error rate because you need to know what the decision-making process is in the game. For example, you need to know, their AD carry called that. So if the jungler turns around and goes to the bot lane, it's not necessarily like his error if the AD carry forced him to come there. Does that make sense? And the jungler's like, no, I can't right now. And the AD carry's like, but we'll lose the game if we don't. And the jungler's like, okay, I'll trust your call. And then it's like the wrong call. So that's not like an AD carry error, right? So you can't really evaluate this unless you have the comms and you know the structure of the team. There could also be conventions like, okay, we know that we're not good at this, so we have to all in on this earlier play, even though it's like not a great play, we're going to all in on it because it's our only chance to win. And then like it's not really an error to do that play when you could have waited, because you know that if you wait you're going to lose anyway because your team sucks at that for this week of training or something. So probably error rate is the biggest one that is not currently measured, calculated in any way. And then there's not really much else. I mean, we don't have any location data in the game, so we can't really do much. We don't have any really ward location data or stuff like moving in and out of ward or an effective vision score in terms of how much vision reveals opponents' paths. And that's hard because a lot of times vision can show that somebody's not there too, which is just as important as showing that somebody is there. So this is another really hard stat to track, just like in general. There's statistics are a benchmark that you need to have, above which you start evaluating players qualitatively instead of quantitatively. Thank you for the question. Jumping to the announcements for the day. This is the third day in a row I'm streaming regularly, and I'm going to be doing games. And today I'm going to be doing a little bit of academic article review, as well as showing how it is that I learn a new game. So I'm going to start with Apex, get back into shooters and BR. So I'll be going through that. This weekend, I'll be at TwitchCon on Saturday, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to stream then. And then Sunday and Monday, I will probably be with my family, mostly. They're out of school. I think Monday's a holiday of some sort. And then Tuesday, I should be back with the regular stream. So cross my fingers that we'll be back then. And then, that's about it. September's almost over. Now's your chance. Today. You have to sub today or else it's done. Okay, let's jump into question number 2 from Steve. Why is it not playing? There we go.
Hey Weldon, during solo queue practice I'm trying to set training goals for sync games, like looking at the map more often or trying to click faster. But oftentimes I really fast tend to lose focus on this in the game. It's like spacing out and following my normal play. For example, I don't look at the map anymore or become lazy with clicking. How can I avoid this spacing and be focused more consistently during a game? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I think you were doing your plosives into your mic there, which is why the audio quality is so bad, and I apologize to the viewers. Let me translate. Basically, he was saying, I have training goals and I forget to do them. during the game. So how do I focus on training goals? We're actually going to cover that today on stream. So small plug for the stream, twitch.tv/mindgamesweldon. You can catch this show live on Twitch, and you can see answers to questions like this one, for example. Basically, what I'm going to do is you need to play less games and be more intent about them. So your punishment for if you forget your training goals is you stop training, if that makes sense. Then you will forget your training goals less. Because you're like, wow, if I forget these, then I don't get to play anymore. Strong motivation. Otherwise, you can use reminders. You can put sticky notes on your monitor. You can have a timer that goes off every 5 minutes that reminds you. You can use on computer pop-ups that pop up at a certain time during the game. There's a bunch of various like little habit forming trick things you can do, but I think in general you should make it so that you have limited training goals and that you go in with them before the game and you prep and you visualize ahead of time. You clarify them and you have them very strongly in your mind, and then you can really not forget them. I mean, I think that they're probably just not important to you if you're forgetting them because you haven't spent enough time beforehand making sure that they're goals that you want to do and that are valuable for you. So yeah, good question. Thanks for the call in. This is the part of the show where I talk about my Mac program. So come back in 1 minute if you don't want to hear about it again. But basically, I have an online video training course for mindfulness, acceptance, commitment. And this is the program that I've run through with the previous teams that I've worked with. And right now it's an online video course. I'm working on turning it into an app, and eventually it will be. And you can get it right now and do the video course. It will give you permanent access to the app for life when the app does come out, because it's kind of like a self-funded Kickstarter. Anything that if you buy the course now, I just put the money towards the app, and then everybody who owns the course when the app comes out is like a founder, if that makes sense. So yeah, the basic premise is that there's a 15 to 25 minute video every single day, 7 days a week for 7 weeks, so 49 sessions. You do a seated mindfulness training, which is basically a meditation thing, and then there's a lecture. And it takes you through the concepts of mindfulness, the concepts of acceptance, and the concepts of commitment, and the combination of those three together, which is a high-performance framework, you would say, for how to navigate things like training, motivation, and being in the zone, as it were. So yeah, you can check that out at mindgames.gg. Use the code AskWeldon to get your YouTube originated discount. All right, let's jump into question number 3 from Harry.
Hey, Weldon. I was wondering if you believe in the idea of a skill ceiling, and if you think that there is any non-physical reason that any particular individual can or cannot become the best at what they do, be it as either an esports athlete or any other non-physical skill, like acting.
All right, so yeah, it's not really something you have to believe in. A skill ceiling is just a skill ceiling. It's like the limit of human physical capability. And in complex soft skills like acting, it's really hard to measure or say. So I don't really think you can have a clear-cut skill ceiling in acting because it's such a bizarre skill. It's not very naturally selected for, if that makes sense. So things that we're naturally selected for, like our running speed or our muscular endurance or our ability to react to a visual stimuli, these things have a skill ceiling. And for example, you're going to see in swimming, we haven't approached the times again from back when we could wear like floatable suits. So in 2008, 2012-ish was the era where people were like putting on a suit and then putting on a full body suit and then putting on 2 of them because they were like providing lift to get you out of the water so you had less drag. And then they were banned. We're back to just like polyester suits that you can wear only from like from your knee to your waist if you're a guy, or from your knee to your shoulders if you're a girl. And so we haven't been able to reapproach those records and those speeds because we have pretty much gotten close to maximizing technique in swimming. And everything from here is waiting for the freak occurrence of genetic potential to work itself out and for that person to end up as a swimmer. There's probably a ton of people on Earth right now who would be freakishly fast swimmers, but they didn't become swimmers. So We'll never know. And yeah, then that, yeah. So there's just a straight up skill ceiling. As far as for esport, since this is an esport focused show, I would consider esport as a pretty soft skill, similar to acting, because reaction speed is actually really static across the population. Like your reaction speed just to like your doctor hitting your knee, right? It's not, the distribution is not extreme, and probably I would guess it's not selective for high skill in esport. I would guess that the distribution of reaction speed at the top of esport is pretty similar to the normal population. I don't have any evidence or proof of that, but that's just my guess, because the thing that is more important than just your reaction speed is your trained reaction speed. You see a visual stimuli and you have a programmed reaction. So like you see something in a game and your programmed reaction is to like move your mouse and click. Okay, so this is a very complex skill and it's trained. It's not like naturally selected for. And that reaction speed is different than the one the doctor's testing for when they hit your knee, which is just, how healthy are your nerves and are you a normal human or not? So the ability to train that and learn it over and over again, it kind of depends on the game. So there's games like shooters where you learn a base skill and then you maintain it over and over again. And so you can maintenance that skill, and we'll see people approach the cap and differentiate pretty rapidly. So you see like CSGO players and players that are really good at first-person shooters, which is basically mouse speed and mouse accuracy according to like a certain set of pixels. That's a skill that we're getting a distribution, and we're seeing like people are better at it or worse at it, essentially. At the top end, and it's around long enough, 8 years, 10 years in the same form that we can start to have genetic outliers. But then games like League of Legends, which are so knowledge-based and reward so little that reaction speed, they reward more learning. This is something that's almost entirely input after you're born. So all of the wiring for, if you're a standard human, like a neurotypical human, if you're neurotypical and you have like a certain threshold of IQ above which, then you're differentiated by your environment. So it's just if your parents raised you well, you could be a league pro, and if they didn't, then probably you can't. And if you're 18 and you're already not, super high rank, and if you're 18 and you put in a lot of effort and focus into learning league, and you're not already really high rank, then you probably can be like, sucks. Sorry, mom and dad, you didn't do it right. Thanks. And that's it, or preschool or whatever, it's probably too late by the time that you're 7 or 8 to worry about it. Obviously, you could say that, okay, so it was too late by the time I was 7 to 8 and I'm 18. So that's 12 years. If I put in 12 years into reformatting my brain, maybe I can get there. Yes and no, because the brain forms itself by dying. So essentially you have like a lot of neurons, and then it like whittles itself down over the course of 10, 15 years into its current shape. So what you have is a lot more static than what you're going to be developing. Like what you had and what it became was a lot more dynamic than what you're able to do as an adult, first of all. Secondly, yes, there is neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, and you could form that, but like it would take you 12 years to catch up to somebody who's 18 and already well-formed in that way. So that puts you at like 30 before you're like the same as an 18-year-old, and then you don't have the amount of free time, and you don't have the creativity and fearlessness that goes with being young and aggressive, and like you have all these like adult worries and like maybe relationships and time crunch, and just don't worry about it. Do something else with your life. Okay, so yeah, that's the long, convoluted answer to that question. Thank you, Harry, for the call-in. By the way, a lot of that is based off of various research on prediction of skill in sport. So there's a whole field called talent identification, which looks at trying to identify who could be good at a specific sport. And there are some sports which are very identifiable and some which are not. There are some sports where you have to early specialize, where like, if you're not on a ski by the time you're 3 years old, you're never going to win a downhill ski cup. Your chance of doing that is like close to 0%. Whereas like soccer, you could not touch a soccer ball before the age of 15 and you could still go pro at the age of 21. So it's like a late differentiation sport in which you can do lots of play and lots of other sports. Like, obviously, you can't be sitting on a couch, right? You have to be like high level in some other sport or doing lots of other stuff. But it's conducive to late specialization, if that makes sense. Gymnastics, horrible for late specialization, for example. You can't late specialize in gymnastics. You have to be doing that when you're little, or you're no way are you going to have developed the ligament flexibility and strength to pull it off as an adult. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it as an adult. It just means you're not going to win an Olympic medal. You're going to be the best in your age group, and you're going to have really strong joints, but you're not going to be able to compete with the 20 to 26-year-olds who have matured, or actually the people who are a little bit lighter than them, so they have a stronger muscle to weight ratio, strength to weight ratio. Okay. Last question. Yeah. Oh, so what I was saying was that it's based on that field, right? And so that field has a lot of research on genetics and sport, and if you read a lot of research articles in that field, you'll kind of get a feel for what sports are based on in terms of where the skill comes from, and that is what allows me to kind of surmise or guess what it would be like in esport. Okay, last question is from Jared.
Hi, Weldon. Quick question for you. When you generalize the mentality of men and women, there tend to be different motivators. My question is, do you have experience with coaching different genders? And can you talk about the ways that you have or might do something different to get the best response from someone? Whether that is the reward system, methods for giving or receiving criticism, or motivations. Obviously, there is a very wide range of personalities in both men and women, but I'm curious what you think the key differences are from a coaching perspective. Thanks.
All right, so I'm going to go into this really in depth in the stream afterwards, so you could hop over to Twitch and watch like the full answer there. I'm going to go through a research article, but the basic long and short of it is the differences that may or may not exist don't show up at the individual level for a coach. So if you're coaching a team of like 20 people, this isn't a question that you're ever going to have to ask yourself. Looking at population level research. This is like stuff that you should consider when you're enacting policy or changing rules that will affect tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, but not 10, because the motivators on an individual level are very individual. And stuff like, for example, if you look at the effect size of studies, even like 20 or 30 years ago, the effects, the significance of the finding is there in the studies you're showing, but the explanation of how much it explains is between like 0.5 and 3% of motivation. So then there's 97% of like intrinsic motivation that is explained by like not by gender. So you as a coach are dealing with that, not like the 3% of their motivation that is like explained by their gender, for example. Or the 1%, or the less than 1%, or the 0%, because they're just like any other person, because they don't fall onto one of the extreme edges of their gender. So they just are right in the middle of the bell curve, where there's 99.8% overlap. So the real answer is that I've talked to. This is a hot topic at coaching conferences, and there are coaches that have anecdotal stories about how coaching with women's teams, you need to understand the culture of women, especially as a man. You need to address their issues and barriers. You need to address the style in which they like to receive feedback. And a lot of these are sociological and cultural. So, for example, if you know Finnish women around the age of 18, how they like to receive feedback, then that's how you need to coach them. Or Finnish men around the age of 18, or American Arkansas men around the age of 16, how they like to receive feedback. If you're coaching a team of 12-year-old girls in Missouri, you're going to probably have a lot less socialized gender feedback norms, and so you can probably coach them more just like humans, little humans, and not have to worry about learning. You just learn your players on an individual level, and not trying to figure out like the culture of women in that area. So as far as how it plays out in practice, just get to know your athletes really well and coach them all at the place that they need to be coached at. You're basically like the information you're looking for, the way that the question was phrased is pretty useless for coaches when it comes down to the 1v1, one-on-one stuff, or 12, 20-on-1 stuff. This is stuff for like people who are making policy for thousands of people. All right, that's the show for today. Make sure to come to twitch.tv/MyGamesWeldon if you want to go through the research article that I have on this to get more illuminated about the science behind gender differences, particularly in sport. Just as a teaser, I'll say that a lot of it is socialized differences that have been found. So if you look at the research, for example, that's done by Pew or that's done by thousands and thousands of researchers, what you'll find is there were gender differences in intrinsic motivation in the 80s in terms of classrooms, in the 70s. And then as classrooms became more equal, and as they did away with like gendered practices of teachers and teacher training quality went up, those disappeared. So they were there only because of issues with how education was structured and how research was done and theories of motivation, by the way, which were worse then because they were less accurate to human motivation and they were more designed by people who were like in a singular mindset and didn't understand like motivation across a broad spectrum of people. And then if you look in the 80s, for example, sport research found huge differences in participation in differences in motivation for people who had scholarships for athletics between men and women. And then that went away. That finding went away as scholarships became more equal for men and women with Title IX, where it became like you had to have the same number. And so those findings disappeared because it was set up to like how the culture was. And then also there were differences in the 80s, which is the article we're going to look at gender differences in what was called then intrinsic motivation, although that theory has since like fallen by the wayside, not really, but been replaced by more complex theories. It's a really good way to talk about it for intrinsic, extrinsic motivation. For just like layman's stuff, it's a great way to talk about it because it's pretty accurate to what motivation is, and the nuances don't matter as much. But the findings there that was the one I was referencing where like it explains like 3% of differences are in intrinsic motivation at the collegiate level in NCAA can be explained by gender. And this is as measured by perceptions of coach action. So as perceptions of like how my coach's coaching style affect my motivation, or a measure of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. That result has also disappeared over time as more and more women have started doing athletics, and it's become less of an outlier thing. And so you get more of a standard sample size of women or standard population of women within the studies at these universities. And then all of a sudden that statistical difference disappeared. So a lot of the stuff that you're finding is going to be not through biased research necessarily. Right. I'm not saying that research is biased. It is biased, but I'm not saying that like these nefarious researchers went out and found this stuff. I'm saying that like it existed because of the measurement tools and the setup of society and the way that stuff was then, and it probably existed then too in the population that was being measured. But when you trying to understand a phenomenon as complex as gender differences in motivation, you have to look at also change over time and figure out why these gender differences exist. And certainly in your question, there was a lot of hints of like different rewards and stuff like that. And that's not really how we see motivation anymore. If you look at self-determination theory, it's a lot based on fulfillment of emotional needs, or like how it is that the actions that we take fit our identity and how good we are at them. So the 80s view of Skinnerian kind of like reward and punishment kind of mechanics, although that's like that obviously that science is there, it's been built upon and it's much more complex now. So I would say like it's a very dangerous clickbaity topic at the population level with these studies because you can find this stuff, but most of it has no relevance on how it is that anything is done in a group of 20 people. And more, it's how we need to enact policy to erase biases in how we structure sport and education. If that makes sense. All right. That's the end of the show. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and I will see you next time.